Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning as we discuss negotiating patent license agreements. We're going to start out with a brief explanation of who we are, review our purpose and the agenda for today. I'll introduce our guests. I would ask you to please keep your mics muted as we move through the day. We all have little distractions in the background and things like that, so we would appreciate that. If you have any questions this morning, go ahead and feel free to add them to the chat, but I'm going to pause after each speaker so that you can get your questions answered. If you'd rather not ask questions yourself, we can do that for you. You can just throw them in the chat. Thank you. And also, we are adding our contact information in the chat. We're putting our LinkedIn profiles in there. If you'd like to get in touch with Gary or Griffin or I, our LinkedIn profiles links will be in the chat, as well as the link to the DefTech website. So we are the Maryland Defense Technology Commercialization Center. This is a program that is funded by the Federal Economic Development Administration. It's a program of the Maryland Department of Commerce. And we support helping businesses connect with the research and innovation that's going on in our Department of Defense labs in the state of Maryland. We are also, this meetup, is Taking Technologies to Market, is sponsored by the Center for Innovation, Technology, and Entrepreneurship. And we are a nonprofit that's focused on supporting regional economic growth by developing evidence-driven support for businesses, training programs, economic development programs, and things like that. And Site hosts this meetup for us. Go ahead and feel free to add your contact information in the chat if you would like to. I do want to talk for a minute just about the kinds of people that are on this morning, so you know who you're sharing your information with. We have a lot of business resource providers on with us this morning, and that's everything from attorneys to economic development organizations. We have the TEDCO represented a couple of times, the Small Business Development Centers. So as you share information, that's some of the people that will see it. We also have potential people for you to partner with or just network with. We have people in biotech, biohealth, big data, people developing products. We've got manufacturers on with us this morning, and a variety of businesses and industries representative of who DefTech serves. So 2 weeks ago, we had a meetup on patents, and we talked about what it takes for a company to be ready to license a patent. We talked at a very high level how to read a patent and how to consider a patent or some technology that you're looking to license from a manufacturing perspective. We also talked about how to write an effective commercialization plan, which is something that you're going to have to do if you license research and innovation from one of our DoD labs. So today we are joined by Rick Tarr. He is the Southern Maryland NavalX Tech Bridge Director and the Director of the NOC-AD Technology Transfer Office, which is in Southern Maryland. Rick is responsible for the T2 office at Pax River and has been on the forefront of innovating ways for the labs to connect with businesses for a long time. In fact, in 2018, Rick and his colleague, Michelle Medinsky, both from the Naval Air Warfare Center Aircraft Division, were awarded the FLC's National Outstanding Technology Transfer Professional Award designation. That just means Rick really knows what he's talking about. He's really good at this stuff, and he's quite innovative in the way he approaches trying to find ways to work with business. So Rick is going to help us understand the perspective of the labs. And as we do nearly every time we speak with our business community, understanding the perspective and needs of those that we communicate with or that we engage with and develop partnerships with is critically important. And PLAs, patent license agreements, are a form of communication, a form of engagement, and a partnership. So Rick's going to help us move forward in a way that considers both sides of the coin. So he's going to explain to us what the labs are looking for when they license technology. And we're going to look at the other side, what business needs to be considering with help from our partner, Eric Feig from Nempos Braue. Nempos Braue is a law firm in Baltimore. They are a partner of DefTech. They have supported us for some time now. They were really important in us being able to host our last pre-pandemic in-person event that was an exclusive event just for deaf tech clients and prospective clients. Eric is going to discuss the needs and considerations of businesses and what should businesses think about when they're entering into a PLA. So you'll want to pay attention to both of these speakers this morning. Rick, thanks so much for being here and for sharing your critical insights for businesses wishing to enter into PLAs. Can you start out just by giving us a high-level overview of exactly what a patent license agreement is?
Sure. Thank you, Kim, for the opportunity. Also, a little bit of background. As you mentioned, from the Naval Air Warfare Center Aircraft Division at Pax River, Maryland. We're a fairly large Navy research, development, test, and evaluation lab with about 10,000 scientists, engineers supporting us at 3 sites. So, got a lot of folks doing innovation within the lab, and likewise, a lot of work with patents and intellectual property. So to answer your question, from our lab's perspective, and certainly from licensing, the patent license agreement allows the customer to make, use, and sell an innovation from our lab. So oftentimes that innovation will have certain fields of use. So we've got examples for sealants and corrosion prevention. You can limit it or have all fields of use. And then, of course, if there is application in an international market, we do have the option to do international filings. So that patent license could also enable a licensee to practice the invention internationally.
Okay. So when you do this for the labs use patent license agreements as one way that they work with businesses. Can you talk a little bit about the outcomes and what you're looking for? What are some of the goals that you have when you're entering into a PLA?
Absolutely. So it's I think there are probably 2 major goals. So first, obviously, we're supporting the warfighter, and we're a R&D lab, so we're not a production facility. So for a lot of these technologies, in order for them to get in the hands of the warfighters and the maintainers, we need to partner with the industry to scale. So we have examples of that, again, with our corrosion prevention systems. We have a fiber optic splice system that we're going through that process. So that's probably first and foremost. The second is one of the major goals of tech transfer from a federal perspective, and this includes all the federal labs, USDA, DOE, is to have a return on investment for the investment that the taxpayers made in their federal labs and the innovations coming out of them. So there is a responsibility for us to generate economic returns based on our innovations, and to reach out to industry, hopefully to allow them to license and then sell these products, especially the dual-use products, in the market.
So that's important, and I've watched our efforts here to remain connected in the community and just get to know businesses here and work in all kinds of different areas with our entrepreneurship programs and everything. And that's part of why I assume NavalX decided to set up these tech bridges. And I'm just going to make a plug. If you don't know what tech bridges are, Rick and his colleague, Krista Michaelis from the Carter Rock Tech Bridge program were both on several weeks ago with us explaining exactly what Tech Bridges is and how they are an opportunity for the Navy to connect with these innovative, non-traditional kind of contractors. So I'm just going to plug, if you go to our YouTube channel, Taking Technologies to Market, you will see about a 20-minute discussion with Rick and Krista on tech bridges. So when you, and I like your emphasis, Rick, that it's not just, it's important to, of course, for you to spin technologies back in as a final product. But I like the fact that you made it clear that tech transfer is also about helping and benefiting local economies. So as you're doing this, and you mentioned too that the research that you do isn't a completed product. It's not a warfighter solution ready to go out to the ship for the Navy or to soldiers or airmen. So you need companies that can develop this into the technology, the final product that will be useful and serve the warfighter. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of companies that you're looking to do business with, and ways that you reach out to them?
Sure, absolutely. Great question. So it really varies on the technology and the application and really the end use. So a lot of the technologies, like you mentioned, are at the lower developmental stage and need some continued R&D and productization of them to go to market. So we're looking really from small startup entrepreneurs that can incorporate our technologies into an end product, or sort of traditional OEM defense contractors that may integrate a piece or a component, a coating system, or an RF shielding system that we've developed into their end product. So it's really the full spectrum, and that especially applies to dual use technologies. So technologies that both serve a military function and a commercial function. And we really have a full range of companies that have licensed products from us, from startups that had an Indiegogo site, to well-established players in a given market. So it's really across the board, and we're open to talk with any of them. I see Michelle Medinsky from my office is also on the line. Michelle leads this patent process for our office, so she's willing to talk to any company. And we also have resources, both DefTech. Also, there's a national PIA tech link that's available for companies to work with to go through that patent process, or I'm sorry, the patent application process.
Yes, yes. I have said this before, that I thought the state was visionary in setting up DefTech, recognizing that there was a need to help businesses with this process, because the companies, some of the companies you're looking at are what are called non-traditional contractors. And so they're not familiar with working with DoD, and it can seem intimidating. So to have programs like DefTech and TechLink that can help a company through that process is really important.
We're blessed in Maryland for having a lot of federal labs. And like our lab, these labs are patenting innovations and technologies. And oftentimes the amount that the lab is trying to recover is cents on the dollar for the R&D that went into the technology. So there's a lot of opportunity, not just on the DoD labs, but also USDA, DOE, NIST. I mean, there are a lot, and for that matter, the University of Maryland has a lot of IP in its portfolio as well. So if you're a startup company looking for complementary innovations, or to even bundle, we've talked about that in the past, of the ability to take a couple pieces of IP from federal labs in the state to create a bundle around your technology area.
So one of the things you mentioned, and I'll go right to this, was the royalty money. So we have worked with companies that didn't realize that they could actually negotiate the terms of the license. And we're going to get into that just a little bit more when we speak to Eric in a minute. But something comes back to the lab, and it's not, for the most part, you're not trying to get rich off this. Your scientists and engineers aren't buying new boats and third and fourth or second homes. Can you talk a little bit about what the Navy does with the royalty money?
Sure, absolutely. So, like all federal labs, a lot of this is guided by statute. So a percentage of the royalty money does go back to the inventor, and then the lab utilizes the remaining either for continued R&D in that technology area, or to help fund the commercialization process of our patent portfolio. So to your point, though, we're not a business that's in this to make it a sustainable model. So we're the rates that we're looking to recover are a combination of both the value of the patent, and we have folks that help us advise that, But also we're sensitive that we want to get this technology out. So we will negotiate with startups, small businesses, and there's a lot of flexibility in structuring the royalty payments, the minimum royalties, the percentage of royalties on sales. We can do graduated over time. So yeah, to your earlier point, if you're intimidated or you don't get the initial royalty deal that you're looking for, certainly try to negotiate with the lab.
That's important. One of the other things we try to stress with our clients is that this isn't a quick once and done, see you later, never going to talk to you again thing. A patent license agreement really is at the beginning of a relationship. It could be a very lucrative relationship for both sides, for the Navy and the warfighter that you're serving, and for the business, especially if they're developing dual use. So I appreciate that perspective and your willingness to negotiate. And it certainly makes sense based on what you said that tech transfer is also about at a national level supporting the economy and helping develop the economy, because a strong economy is important for our national defense.
Yeah, and I will say to your point about the relationship, I completely agree. We have other agreements like cooperative research and development agreements that can be put in place around our patent license agreements. So you can continue to develop technologies that were initially patented with our inventors. And certainly there's a reach back to the inventor of the technology to help with the limited amount of resources and time to help the commercialization process. So as long as the inventor's still with our lab, certainly we're going to help you get through the commercialization process.
Thank you for that. We've had some great success helping companies develop those relationships and are seeing just all kinds of solutions bloom. And having developed those relationships, started that pre-pandemic. Some of these companies are working on materials for N95 masks, and they're able to work with the labs, and they already have the relationship going. So it's been a great thing to see. And again, great for our country, great for our national defense, great for our health and safety. I appreciate that. I want to pause now and ask if anyone has any questions for Rick. And if you don't have questions right now, certainly feel free to ask when you think about them. So we have some conversation going on in the chat. That's great. People letting everyone know who they are and what they do. It's wonderful. So
I'll do one last plug here.
Yeah. Oh, so somebody did ask a question while you're doing that. And I'll say also that Rick's technology can also be found on a database that the Maryland Department of Commerce set up called defpatmd.com. But somebody did have a question, and I don't know who it is. Can you talk about the timeline for entering into an agreement?
Yeah, certainly. It really depends on the company and how quick we get the paperwork back. So, and I would say it varies from 30 to 60 to 90 days, and then longer if it requires some negotiation. So it's not a long timeline, but certainly from a government perspective, it's quick.
Yeah.
I get that sometimes that perspective is a little skewed, but I think generally 90 days, both for patent license and CRADA, and then certainly quicker if we need to. There's some statutory bars that we need to meet for deadlines for filing certain things. So we have accelerated some of those patent licensing processes to meet those. But yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. We're gonna, and again, if you have questions for Rick, you can put them in the chat. We'll get them at the end, and the same. So now we're gonna move in to talk to kind of the business perspective, and we are joined by, again, Eric Feig from Nempos Braue. Thank you for joining us, Eric. Based on what we just learned from Rick, we know that PLA negotiation shouldn't be a win-lose proposition. There's no need for that. But it is important for businesses to understand all of this from a legal perspective. That's the responsible thing to do. So there's no point in entering into agreement without fully understanding what you're committing to. And I think most of us just know that intuitively. We discussed a couple weeks ago doing the hard work of developing that strong product development plan. Gary Evans talked us through what all of the considerations were, from talking about your staffing and your team to your quality management program. That will help businesses protect our ROI, and that's a first step to understanding the market potential. But Eric, can you talk to us a little bit about just how you approach a license agreement?
Sure, and thanks for having me. I think a good place to start anytime when you're talking about it from both the legal and the business perspectives are recognizing that there are very few issues anymore that are purely legal, purely business. And I think that's a point that sometimes gets forgotten until you're inside the process already. So maybe a place to start is just stepping back a moment and talking about the perspective of just making sure that as you enter into this process as a business, the homework's been done before you even begin. And that, in that sense of making sure you understand what it is you're looking to license, why it is you're looking to license whatever the patent is covering, the technology, whatever it might be, and then what the purposes are and the goals, the risks, the rewards, in a very firm way that you're looking to achieve by virtue of doing that. So I'll give an example. So the why might be, are you looking to this license for further development, to expand reach, for example, product services, to enter new markets, to be able to expand on competitive advantages, or to be able to look defensively. Patents as well have both an offensive and a defensive component that they can be asserted. Are they being, is the license there as well, not just for research, but also to protect a competitive position? And then again, looking at broader, I know we mentioned a few moments ago what some of the lanes are that are relevant. There could be fields of use, geography, territory, all of that. But all of this begins with a planning process that starts really as a combination in the ideal world of looking at it from a business perspective, to be able to say why and what you're doing. And then from the legal, to be able to have counsel. I work with clients all the time that look at legal as being kind of the last step in the process of planning. What I would suggest is that legal be engaged earlier during the planning, while decisions are being made, as another subject matter resource that could help with the planning before any sort of inertia sets in, so that you're in a position to make adjustments as you develop your plan and your goals, rather than have legal, which is too often the case, I think, brought in a position to say either tell us this is all right or not, when there are fewer options and perhaps time becomes more sensitive.
I appreciate that perspective, and I think, I hope business does as well, the people that are listening to us today. So I want to make one thing kind of clear to people that are listening. So we started out with the discussion of the needs of the defense labs and the research and innovation that's going on there. Eric is giving us a broad perspective. You can certainly license from a wide variety of places. Rick mentioned other federal agencies, and I've said this time and time again. It was in our write-up. Maryland is home to 78 federal labs. That's more than twice as much as many as any other state. So there's a lot of potential. In addition, you can license technology from an individual. We have plenty of people that are on today that have their own patents, and that's fine. One thing that the DoD will not do is license technology to someone so that they can hold on to it. So that kind of defensive approach to protecting what you're working on. And that's just a small piece of information that if you're licensing from DoD, the reason that they're developing the stuff, again, we always go back to the mission, why they exist in the first place, and what they're trying to accomplish, which is to support the warfighter. So that outlook where you want to license a patent from the perspective of protecting what you're doing certainly makes sense. Again, we need to take everything into consideration from a business perspective, but just realize if you're licensing from DoD, that's not something you're going to be doing. So one of the things that you talked about with me, Eric, before we got on today, we talked about earlier this week or last week, all time is running together, is this idea of the patent as a bundle of rights. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and I think this is one of those critical points where you blend the legal and the business. Patent rights, there are several of them. They're at the heart of any kind of PLA agreement, and you're talking about the right, patents in general, you're talking about the rights to make, use, sell, offer for sale, or import. Any of these rights could be the subject of a license. All of them could be as well. And there are lots of ways in the course of a negotiation or a discussion to divide them, to slice them thinly or thickly, so to speak, or to tie them into other variables that would be relevant to the goals you're trying to achieve. So again, other relevant issues that would go along with those rights, thinking about exclusivity, to sub-license, particular, I think you mentioned earlier, fields of use, which would be the lane in which you have that room to operate, timing, geographic areas. There's lots of ways that all of this could be approached, and it's not something that is a one-size-fits-all. And going back to that idea of the planning and determining what the goal is, and where those points are that are your must-haves versus your wants or your want-to-haves, or what would be nice, being able to rank those and being able to approach a negotiation or a patent license with an understanding of where you really need to be and want to be positioned at the end point is something that I think is crucial to have a successful agreement and a successful discussion.
Thank you for that. I think we could have a whole separate conversation. And actually, once we finish, I want Rick to address the idea of exclusivity, because I think DoD rarely enters into an exclusive license agreement. And we've talked. I think a couple of weeks ago, we had a manufacturer, Cyrus from RPM Tech, walk us through the thought process of manufacturing. How do you look at IP from a manufacturing perspective? And there are plenty of pieces of technology available from DoD that have uses in multiple industries. And we can talk about that in a little bit. But your idea of that, before that a company should get with you, work with a professional prior to when they think they need to kind of get you in at the beginning is really important. So before they get to you, though, what kind of homework do you suggest they do? This is obviously not something that you can decide one day, oh, I'm going to license something, let me call Eric.
I think it's a great point, and I think this is one of those areas where there's opportunity to have better agreements that's often left on the table by virtue of, well, there's two ways I would look at it. One is by virtue of engaging early, and it's not just with legal, it's with all of the subject matter experts that you would need in the room, and being able to have that interactive dialogue, I think only leads to better results. Homework would include, being able to understand exactly what it is you're looking to license. So the patent, understanding the scope, understanding the limitations of what the patent covers. Patents come in, again, many shapes and sizes, and they cover a specific subject matter, and they have particular claims which define what it is you're going to be able, what you're licensing. Having a deep understanding of that and where the bumpers are, so to speak, in terms of what you can do, what it won't cover, and what others may do as well alongside of you outside of the patent, I think is very, very important. Doing the homework as well to understand those rights that we mentioned a moment ago that we were talking about, to be able and understanding what that may play out as in a practical scenario. It's one thing to be able to look at the agreement and say, you know what, this is a contract, I see the language, but to make sure that as best you can to define your goals so that the language then could be measured against what you're trying to accomplish within the business. I'd say additional homework is thinking about how to future-proof your relationship and the license. So understanding innovation is not a static process. It is one that is ongoing. So being able to think as part of the planning of what will look like, not just now, a year from now and throughout the term, and what adjustments or what rights might be needed in the future as part of the discussion. And again, these are issues that have what I would say is legal impact, because they would impact how you would approach the agreement, but they are also deeply intertwined as business considerations. So I would say all of that, and making sure, as a process standpoint, that it's not legal on one side of the room and business on the other, that there is that integrated dialogue where each understands the other's perspective and making sure that they're working in tandem as partners to get the right place.
Okay, thank you for that. There's obviously a lot of homework to be done. So a couple of weeks ago, we did a kind of overview on how to read a patent, and it was at a high level. And we've had some questions about that. And so you mentioned that companies need to understand the technology that they're considering licensing. In 2 weeks, we're going to kind of take a deeper dive, slow down a little bit, and go through how to read a patent. We're going to talk about all the different areas of the patents. They can be intimidating if you've never read one before. And even if you are familiar with patenting your own technology, maybe it can be good to take a step back and relearn and kind of keep your mind open and listen to somebody who's done this before. So Gary Evans is gonna walk us through that process in a couple weeks. And it's probably a month ago, we hosted a World IP Day celebration. And we had an entrepreneur on who was a researcher at the Army Research Lab. Ended up, he and his wife both left the Army as civil servants doing research to found their own company, and they licensed technology from that lab. But they didn't just license the technology and build something just from that. They kind of protected what they licensed by putting patents around patents and around patents. Do you see companies doing that often, or do you advise them on that or how to do that?
Again, it depends on what the goal is. At the end of the day, one patent, sometimes it's sufficient, sometimes it's more. And again, so these are, in that regard, I think one of the additional issues that needs to be thought about, I mentioned this as well, is what happens with, I mentioned new innovation, how the ownership is going to accrue for new innovations that might happen in the course of the license. That could be from a licensor perspective, that could be from the licensee's perspective as well, how all of that would be handled, and the patents upon patents upon patents. I think I like the way you frame that, in the sense of particularly how and who is going to be responsible if something new that is patentable comes along in the course of this. Not only who is going to own it, but who is then going to go after the patent on that, and how is that going to be handled? They're all important points.
So that's Rick mentioned cooperative research and development agreements, and I believe, Rick, do you want to hop back in for a minute and talk about that idea of new innovation coming out of Cradles and how you manage that process of agreeing to who owns what?
Yeah, absolutely. Cradles are the vehicle that allows us to continue to do R&D with a licensee. And the Cradle would detail the IP rights associated with any inventions that came out of that joint collaboration. So in that, and we have examples of that occurring where we had a base technology that was for a military use. An entrepreneur came along and said, "Hey, this would be great in, the automotive industry or the trucking industry," and then they continued development of that technology with our original innovator. So, yeah, definitely something to consider as you're looking for technology that, again, is dual use, but maybe not contemplated by our inventor as a dual use technology.
Okay, thank you for that. So Eric, one of my favorite things is talking about avoidable mistakes. And I think there's plenty of opportunity to make mistakes in licensing technology, especially if you choose not to work with an expert like Eric. Can you talk about some of the things that are completely avoidable, some of the mistakes you've seen businesses made and maybe had to come in and clean up?
There's a lot of areas where you could fall down on this, and I think it's a very important point. The reason I'm stressing the idea of working in tandem, working in partnership so much is that I've seen too often where the discussions, the decisions, and all of the planning happens, and then the attorney is brought in, whomever it might be, and brought in a limited sense, in the sense of just tell us this is all right, and here's our plan. Now go make that happen. And what happens is, again, instead of having a partner and an advocate that is looking out for your best interests, they're going to do the best that they can, but without being fully informed and without having that channel where you can actively interact and really have a deep understanding. What you end up with is often an agreement that is good or good enough, perhaps, but often not optimal. And then later, where that plays out is once you're into the life of the agreement, then all of those "why didn't we" type questions start to come up, and I wish we had. That, to your point, sometimes avoidable by virtue of doing the upfront homework, the upfront planning, and being in the room with each other. I see that happen far too often. The other one is looking at legal and business as two really distinct channels within the relationship, and again, within what you're trying to accomplish. I mention this all the time to clients and to others that I work with to say, look, the legal issues are impacted by the business decisions. The business decisions should take into account the legal issues. It's not just managing risk. Legal work, the license, I tend to encourage clients to look at as an opportunity. You're building perhaps a business or a business line or something that might be commercialized on top of an agreement. Treat the agreement as an opportunity that is going to be, let's say for most companies, is perhaps revenue generating, opportunity generating, as opposed to merely an expense.
Thank you. One of the things we talked about in a past event was the importance of understanding that you really need to know that the technology, the patent that you're reading, does what it says it does, and you might need to validate that the outcomes that it talks about actually can be achieved. And suggested that it's important to work with a manufacturer. For example, if you're going to, Cyrus from RPM Tech shared this with us, you want to make sure you know how much that the technology works as expected. And you want to make sure you understand how much it might cost to develop a prototype. You might actually have to develop a prototype before you get too far down the line. There are so many things to think about. We talked about that product development plan that Gary Evans talked about, and everything that goes into there. So it's not a one lane thing. Business owner as a CXO considering licensing has to have this very broad perspective that takes into account legal, that takes into account how they're going to develop the product. Do they have the team? Do they have the financial resources, or do they know where to get them? And also, as Cyrus pointed out, if you don't have it in-house, get it. There are plenty of consultants, plenty of experts in different areas that we can work with to make sure that we're protecting ourselves as we enter into this kind of agreement. So thank you for that, Eric. And I'm going to pause and ask if anyone has any specific questions for Eric. And as we do that, you can just put them in the chat or just let us know I have a question. I don't know if there's a hand raising function, but don't do that. I don't know where I would see it anyways. I wanted to go back to Rick for a minute and talk about exclusive licenses and whether the DoD does that and how often you've seen that.
Yeah, no, we do exclusive and partially exclusive licenses for certain fields of use. Um, the bulk of those exclusive licenses are done internationally. So when we partner with a company to protect an international um, country or field of use, we'll often do an exclusive license for that. Um, Again, that's part of the business strategy and the business plan that is presented with the licensing package that determines if we're going to consider an exclusive license. So there's a couple statutory things we have to do. We have to notify industry that we're doing this, put it out for notice. But again, I would say it's rare in the U.S. markets, and it has to be highly compelling. So the company has to show that there is a very compelling reason why they're going to be investing either resources or material investments for that commercialization process. So,
Mhm.
um,
Okay. Thank you for that. I assume that's not one that would take 30, 60, or 90 days, but potentially longer.
yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to throw this out there. Griffin, get ready, because I'm going to ask you to hop in for a second. What I want to talk about just for a minute is this concept of field of use. We have a patent that Griffin has looked at a couple of times. So Griffin is a DevTech program manager, and he works with companies to help understand what technology solutions they might be looking for, and connects them with the research and innovation that's going on in the DoD labs. So Griffin, we have a rate responsive tether. And I think that's a good patent to talk about, examples of different fields of interest. Can you just talk about that, where you see that? Just give us a quick description of what it is, and then talk about different fields of interest where people might license.
Yeah, absolutely. So the technology to which Kim is referring is called a rate-activated tether strap. And it's developed by the Army Research Lab up here in Aberdeen. And basically what it is a bungee cord that as you pull it quickly, it resists being pulled. So depending on the rate at which it's pulled determines how quickly it restrains itself. So you can see that would be useful for something like maybe seat belts, or keeping something that needs to stay in place, but also allowing it some flexibility when it doesn't need to be restrained. So the Army Research Lab, in their kind of evaluation of the commercial potential for this technology, well, they stray away from a exclusive license in this case because there's so many different fields of use that this particular technology could have. For example, some of those might include applications in prosthetics and seat belts and helmet restraint systems, and shoe enclosures and automotive harnesses. So what you'll find in something like that has multiple uses is that typically tech transfer agreements are non-exclusive, and you'll need to get, and if it's a popular technology, you'll likely need to get creative as to how you intend to carve out a piece of market where that technology might be applicable that's not already licensed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I think having an example is helpful, and something like that helps us understand why the Army, for example, in this case, wouldn't be interested in an exclusive license, because there is such wide applicability. So thank you, Griffin, for jumping in completely unprepared for that.
Yeah, of course.
I did want to, there is a question that Tom Sanders from CTSI asked as he signed up for this meetup. So Tom, I don't know if you want to explain this more, but you asked for a better understanding of SBIR data rights. And importantly, because SBIRs are small business innovative research or innovation research, that is a grant that many federal agencies offer businesses the opportunity for funding to develop something that meets their mission needs. So this is sort of a sensitive topic. So once you get data rights, how do you exercise those rights with your government customer without turning them off? You have them, so but how do you do this? Again, we're talking from a relationship perspective. Is that something that you can address, Rick? This idea of a company having certain rights and needing to exercise those rights. It's a somewhat sensitive topic, but
yeah, SBRs doesn't fall within the domain of my office. I know the SBR data rights changed within the last few years, so I wouldn't be the right person to talk to. But
okay.
It brings up a good point. We do have an SBR team that maybe would be a good topic for a future event.
Mm-hmm. We have covered SBIRs and STTRs, but there seems to be a never-ending need for questions to be answered because every business is different. Their purpose and getting an SBIR is different. Their industries are different. Their customers are different. So it might be something that we bring in your SBIR office, and I'll ask you for contact information so that we can do that.
Kim, it's Gary here.
Yes.
Just as a general comment, like a lot of federal funding, the SBIR money carries with it the right for the government to have a non-exclusive license to any data that's generated through the SBIR project. And, it's royalty free, it's worldwide, so on and so forth. And it just means that the government can make use of the data for their own purposes, but they can't disclose it to third parties. So I don't know if that would have addressed Tom's point, but that's a sort of general top level comment. I'm sure Rick's SBIR folks would have a much more detailed answer than that.
Yep. Chuck, do you want to hop in?
Sure. I review for NSF SBIRs, and there's a specific section in the NSF SBIR application which talks about data and how you're going to handle it. And many companies do indicate that the data in that is proprietary. And as Gary said, with SBIRs, the government does always have the ability to license it royalty free for giving you the money. That's the one. Don't know that I've ever heard of that happening, but they do have to keep the data proprietary. So many of the, so much, I work with biotech a lot, and the patents are really critical, and the data are critical for getting the patent. So that is a really critical aspect of SBIRs, to be able to maintain that confidentiality. So they can protect it there. And that's SBIR and STTR. They're basically the same.
Thank you for that. It's a little bit different side of the subject that we're talking about. So Rick, Eric, thank you for being here. Let me know if there's any kind of a wrap up thing you want to, or anything you didn't mention earlier that you want to mention at this point.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. So as we've been talking about, licensing certainly isn't something that businesses take lightly. And understanding the needs and goals of the lab is a first step to being able to successfully negotiate a PLA. So now we have the perspective of the both the lab side and the business side, and that will help businesses better negotiate licenses and understand and develop a productive relationship and partnership with the labs. So I'm going to turn back to a minute to the topic of what DefTech is and why the Department of Commerce set up this program. Again, our purpose is to help businesses make use of the extraordinary lab resources that are available in the state of Maryland, as we are home to 78 federal labs. In most of those state-of-the-art facilities, the highly sought-after expertise with the scientists and engineers. Rick mentioned they have about 10,000 scientists and engineers in the Naval Air Warfare Center Aircraft Division. They're available to work with. That cutting-edge intellectual property, all that research and innovation that's going on, that's available to help businesses grow. Obviously, DoD is developing it to support their mission, but business has the opportunity to use that, to license that technology to enter into Cradles. So again, we did a very brief overview of how to read a patent, kind of high level. We're going to dig into that because you want to understand The freshness of the patent, it does kind of have a freshness date on it, and you want to understand that. You want to understand who developed the patent. Has it been referenced other times? There are codes, there are claims, there's the abstract. We're going to take an in-depth look at how you read a patent in order to be able to think through the licensing potential. So at our next event, we will dig into that. I'm going to share my screen. I want to thank everyone for being here today, for taking the time to spend with us. Again, I want to thank both Rick Tarr from the director of the Southern Maryland Tech Bridge. Rick's contact information is here. You can find him on LinkedIn. And Eric Feig from Nempos Braue. Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Nempos Braue, for lending us Eric. And I would like to tell everyone again, we are going to be hosting an event next week, or in 2 weeks on June 30th, that will cover how to read a patent. So we hope to see everyone back here. Thank you. Have a good week. Respect each other. Wash your hands. Wear your masks. Stay safe. See you in 2 weeks.